The first sirens wailed, a mournful cry swallowed almost instantly by the rending shriek of atmospheric entry. On Kepler 186f, a world painstakingly terraformed and nurtured for 2 generations, the day had begun like any other. Children were heading to school. Farmers were tending their crops in the hydroponic farms outside the main hab domes, and the automated mining rigs were steadily extracting valuable resources from the planet's crust. Then, the sky turned to fire in a warning, in a declaration of war. Just a sudden, unrelenting rain of plasma fire from orbit. The initial strikes targeted population centers. New Eden, the largest city, became ground zero. Buildings vaporized in flashes of blinding light, the reinforced domes offering scant protection against the sheer destructive power unleashed from above. Panic seized the colony. Comms channels overloaded with desperate cries for help, pleas for evacuation, and the terrified screams of the dying. The colony's planetary defense systems, antiquated and designed for pirate raids, were utterly useless against the unseen enemy. They couldn't even acquire a target lock. Sarah, a young teacher at New Eden Elementary, herded her students into the reinforced shelter beneath the school. The ground trembled with each impact, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal. She tried to maintain a calm facade, singing familiar songs to drown out the sounds of destruction, but her hands trembled as she clutched a tattered datapad containing emergency protocols. Outside, chaos reigned. Automated emergency vehicles, designed to respond to natural disasters, were now dodging falling debris and navigating through streets choked with fleeing civilians. The colony's security forces, hopelessly outmatched, attempted to establish defensive perimeters, their energy weapons proving pathetically ineffective against the orbital bombardment. Old Man Hemlock, a grizzled veteran of the Terran Wars, watched from his fortified farmhouse on the outskirts of New Eden as the city burned. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was no ordinary attack. This was a systematic extermination. He frantically tried to reach his grandchildren, who lived in the city, but the comms were jammed with emergency broadcasts and the static of disintegrating infrastructure. The bombardment continued for what felt like an eternity, each strike a hammer blow against the fragile hope of survival. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped out of silence, descended, broken only by the crackling of fires and the moans of the wounded. The survivors emerged from their shelters into a world transformed into a hellscape. New Eden, once a thriving metropolis, was now a smoldering ruin. The air was thick with ash and the stench of death. The vulnerability of humanity, so carefully shielded by layers of technology and distance, was laid bare. They were alone, defenseless, and utterly at the mercy of an unknown and merciless enemy. The dragons, slumbering, giants of the cosmos, remained undisturbed in their ancient lairs for now. But the echoes of the attack, the cries of the dying, had reached even them. The age of fire and blood was about to begin. The news from Kepler 186f sent shockwave through the Terran Federation. Initial reports, fragmented and incomplete, painted a picture of utter devastation as clearer images and data streams emerged. The horror solidified into a cold, burning rage. The Federation Council convened an emergency session, the holographic projections of its members flickering with grim determination. Admiral Zhao, commander of the Federation fleet, stood before the council, his face etched with anger and frustration. The attack was surgical, he reported, his voice tight. Precision strikes targeting key infrastructure, population centers, and defense installations. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. The immediate assumption was piracy. The outer colonies were vulnerable, and pirate raids, though usually small-scale, were a constant threat. But this was different. This was an act of war. "We've analyzed the energy signatures of the weapons used," a science advisor reported. "They're unlike anything we've encountered before, not consistent with known pirate technology or any rogue nation-state." Suspicion quickly fell on the Zargonian Empire, a volatile and expansionist power on the Federation's borders. Tensions had been rising in recent months, and several border skirmishes had already occurred. But the Zargonians denied any involvement, and their denial, strangely, seemed genuine. The council debated for hours, arguments raging back and forth. Some called for immediate retaliation against the Zargonians, demanding a show of force to deter further aggression. Others urged caution, arguing for a thorough investigation before launching a potentially disastrous war. Ultimately, a compromise was reached. A formal declaration was issued condemning the attack on Kepler 186F as an act of barbarism and vowing to bring the perpetrators to justice. A massive military mobilization was authorized, with the Federation fleet ordered to prepare for deployment. Admiral Zhao, despite his reservations, understood the need for action. He knew that humanity needed to project strength to demonstrate that it would not tolerate such an atrocity. But he also knew that they were flying blind. They had no idea who their enemy was or what their motives might be. Meanwhile, on Kepler 186F, the survivors were struggling to rebuild their shattered lives. Makeshift shelters were erected amidst the ruins, and desperate efforts were underway to recover the dead and care for the wounded. The colony's emergency beacon, miraculously still functioning, continued to transmit its distress signal into the void, a desperate plea for help in a galaxy that seemed deaf to their suffering. The call for vengeance resonated throughout the Federation. Young men and women flocked to recruitment centers, eager to avenge the fallen and defend their homes. The stage was set for a swift and decisive military response, a hunt for the unknown enemy that had dared to strike at the heart of humanity. Little did they know that their quest for justice would lead them down a path far more dangerous and ancient than they could ever imagine, and that the true enemy was not who they suspected. The dragons were stirring as the Federation fleet prepared for war. Whispers began to circulate. Strange, unsettling tales that had been relegated to the fringes of academic study and the dusty corners of forgotten archives. Stories of beings of immense power, creatures of legend. Beings the ancient Terrans had called dragons that Dr. Eris Thorne, a xenoanthropologist at the University of Luna, found himself thrust into the center of this unsettling resurgence of myth. He had dedicated his life to the study of pre-FTL contact folklore, and his colleagues had often dismissed his work as frivolous and irrelevant. Now, his expertise was suddenly in high demand. The dragon lore, as Thorne called it, spoke of ancient guardians, protectors of specific star systems and planetary ecosystems. These were not the fire-breathing monsters of childhood stories, but beings of immense intellect and technological prowess, capable of manipulating space and energy on a scale that dwarfed even the Federation's most advanced technology. "These are just legends, Eris," Admiral Zhao said, his voice laced with skepticism as Thorne presented his findings to the War Council. "Fairy tales to scare children." "Perhaps, Admiral," Thorne conceded, "but the legends are remarkably consistent across multiple cultures and time periods. And, more importantly, they consistently place these dragon territories in specific locations that happen to be strategically significant in relation to the Kepler 186F attack." He displayed a holographic map, highlighting a cluster of star systems bordering Federation space. "Notice the proximity to Kepler 186F. These systems are all marked in ancient texts as being under the protection of something powerful enough to deter even the most aggressive pre-FTL civilizations." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. The possibility, however remote, that the Federation was about to stumble into a conflict with an enemy far beyond their comprehension was deeply unsettling. Further investigation revealed other anomalies. Several deep space probes, sent out centuries ago, had vanished without a trace when entering these dragon territories. And there were scattered reports of unexplained phenomena, strange energy signatures, gravitational distortions, and sensor glitches. In the same regions, one particularly intriguing report came from a long-range survey vessel that had briefly entered one of the restricted systems before being forced to retreat by an unknown force. The captain's log spoke of colossal structures in orbit around a gas giant. structures that defied any known principles of physics that he described them as scales. Vast metallic plates arranged in a pattern that resembled the hide of a gigantic creature. The evidence was circumstantial, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt in the minds of the Federation's leaders. Could the attack on Kepler 186f have been the work of these legendary dragons? And if so, what had the colonists done to provoke their wrath? The answers, Thorne knew, lay buried in the ancient texts and forgotten lore. The hunt for vengeance was about to become a quest for understanding. A desperate attempt to unravel a mystery that spanned millennia. The Age of Dragons had begun, whether humanity was ready or not. The Federation Council, torn between the desire for swift retribution and the growing unease surrounding the dragon theory, authorized a covert investigation. Admiral Zhao, despite his initial skepticism, was placed in command of a small, highly specialized team tasked with uncovering the truth behind the Kepler 186f attack. Joining him was Dr. Eris Thorne, the xenoanthropologist whose research had sparked the dragon theory. Thorne, eager to prove his hypotheses, saw this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but he also understood the immense responsibility that rested on his shoulders. Rounding out the team was Lieutenant Eva Rostova, a decorated fighter pilot known for her exceptional skills and unwavering courage. Rostova, initially disappointed at being pulled from active duty, quickly recognized the significance of the mission, that if the dragons were real, humanity needed its best pilot. Their vessel was the Stardust, a state-of-the-art reconnaissance ship equipped with advanced sensors and stealth technology. The Stardust was designed for deep space exploration and covert operations, making it the ideal platform for their investigation. Admiral Zhao assembled the team in the Stardust's briefing room. "Our mission is simple," he began, his gaze sweeping across their faces. "Find out who attacked Kepler 186f, and why, if the dragons are involved, we need to understand their motives and capabilities. But remember, this is a fact-finding mission that we are not authorized to engage in hostilities unless absolutely necessary." Thorne adjusted his glasses, his eyes filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "My research suggests that the dragons are highly territorial. We need to approach their space with extreme caution. Any perceived threat could trigger a disproportionate response." Rostova, leaning back in her chair, cracked a wry smile. "So, we're basically tiptoeing through a dragon's lair, hoping not to wake it up?" "Precisely," Zhao replied, his expression grim. "We'll start by analyzing sensor data from the Kepler 186f system, looking for any clues that might have been overlooked. Then, we'll begin a reconnaissance of the surrounding star systems, focusing on those identified in Dr. Thorne's research as potential dragon territories." The Stardust jumped to warp, leaving Federation space behind. As they ventured into the unknown, a sense of anticipation and trepidation filled the ship. They were embarking on a journey into the realm of myth and legend, a journey that could either save humanity from a terrifying new enemy or confirm its worst fears. Their investigation would lead them through uncharted territories, force them to confront ancient mysteries, and test the limits of their courage and understanding. The fate of humanity, it seemed, rested on the shoulders of this unlikely trio: a seasoned admiral, a skeptical scientist, and a hotshot pilot. As they delved into the secrets of the dragons, the hunt was on. While the Stardust stealthily probed the fringes of dragon territory, a Federation patrol fleet, emboldened by the public outcry and eager to avenge Kepler 186f, disregarded orders and ventured deep into the Forbidden Zone. Led by the brash Captain Valerius, the fleet of 5 cruisers was on a reconnaissance-in-force mission, a thinly veiled attempt to provoke a response and identify the enemy. The dragons obliged, though not in the way Valerius expected. As the Federation ships crossed the designated boundary, a shimmering distortion appeared in space, and 3 colossal vessels emerged. They were unlike anything the humans had ever seen, sleek, elegant, and impossibly large, their hulls adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and shimmer in the light. Valerius, blinded by arrogance and a thirst for revenge, ordered an immediate attack. For Kepler 186F, he roared over the comms. The Federation cruisers unleashed a barrage of energy weapons, targeting the lead Dragon vessel. The Dragon ships responded with a speed and ferocity that defied belief. Energy beams, far more powerful than anything in the Federation arsenal, lanced out, striking the human cruisers with pinpoint accuracy. Shields buckled and failed, hulls melted, and ships exploded in silent, spectacular bursts of light. The battle was a massacre. The Federation cruisers, hopelessly outmatched, barely managed to fire a second volley before they were annihilated. The Dragon ships, seemingly impervious to the human weapons, moved with an effortless grace, their attacks precise and devastating. From the stardust, cloaked and hidden on the edge of the system, Admiral Zhao and his crew watched in stunned silence. The readings from their sensors were off the charts. The energy signatures of the Dragon weapons were unlike anything they had ever encountered. The sheer power and technological superiority of the Dragons were terrifying. They're tearing them apart, Rostova whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Even with her combat experience, she had never witnessed such a one-sided slaughter. "Hold your position," Zhao ordered, his voice grim. "Do not engage. We need to gather as much data as possible." The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, the Federation patrol fleet was gone, reduced to drifting debris and ionized gas. The Dragon ships, unscathed, simply vanished back into the shimmering distortion, leaving no trace of their presence. The disastrous first contact sent shockwaves through the Federation. The news of the patrol fleet's destruction spread like wildfire, shattering the illusion of human invincibility. Fear and panic gripped the population. The Dragons were real, and they were far more powerful than anyone had imagined. The stardust, carrying the weight of this devastating revelation, turned back towards Federation space. The mission had changed. IT was no longer a question of vengeance, but of survival. Humanity had stumbled upon a force it did not understand and could not hope to defeat. The only hope now was to find a way to negotiate, to appease the Dragons before they turned their wrath upon the rest of humanity. The game had changed, and humanity was losing. Back on Luna, the Federation Council was in disarray. The disastrous encounter with the Dragons had shattered their confidence and forced them to confront the terrifying reality of their own limitations. The clamor for war subsided, replaced by a desperate search for answers. Dr. Eris Thorne, sequestered in the University of Luna's archives, redoubled his efforts to decipher the ancient text that he worked tirelessly, fueled by caffeine and a gnawing sense of urgency, poring over fragmented scrolls, cryptic symbols, and forgotten languages. Slowly, painstakingly, a clearer picture began to emerge. The Dragons were not simply territorial guardians. They were protectors of a delicate ecological and cosmic balance, stewards of a vast network of interconnected systems that spanned across galaxies. They viewed the galaxy not as a collection of resources to be exploited, but as a living organism to be nurtured and protected. They're not inherently hostile, Thorne explained to a hastily convened session of the council, his voice hoarse but filled with conviction. They only act when that balance is threatened. Their attacks are not random acts of aggression, but calculated responses to perceived violations. He presented evidence from the ancient texts suggesting that Kepler 186F was not just any ordinary planet, that IT was designated as a preserve, a world of immense ecological and historical significance, containing unique life forms and ancient artifacts that were vital to the galactic ecosystem. The colonists, Thorne continued, his voice filled with regret, unknowingly settled on a world that was under the Dragon's protection. Their presence, their activities, may have been perceived as a threat to the preserve. The council members listened in stunned silence. The implications were staggering. Humanity, in its relentless expansion, had unknowingly trespassed into a sacred space, triggering a response that was both devastating and, in the Dragon's eyes, justified. But why didn't they warn us? One of the counselors asked, her voice trembling. Why didn't they try to communicate? Thorne sighed. The text suggests that the dragons view direct communication as a last resort. They prefer to act indirectly, using subtle cues and warnings to guide civilizations away from danger. Perhaps those probes that vanished were intended as warnings. Perhaps the sensor anomalies were meant to deter us. Admiral Zhao, still aboard the Stardust, listened to the transmission with a growing sense of dread. He had initially dismissed Thorne's theories as fanciful, but now, confronted with the evidence, he was forced to reconsider. "So what are we supposed to do?" Zhao asked, his voice heavy with resignation. "Apologize? Beg for forgiveness?" "It's more complicated than that, Admiral," Thorne replied. "The dragons are not interested in empty gestures. They want to see concrete action, proof that humanity is willing to respect the balance they protect." The solution, Thorne believed, lay in understanding the specific threat that the colonists had posed to the preserve. What was it about their presence that had triggered such a drastic response? And how could humanity rectify the situation before the dragons unleashed their full wrath? The answer, he suspected, was buried on Kepler 186F, amidst the ruins of a colony that had unknowingly awakened a force beyond its comprehension. The path to peace, if there was one, would be long and arduous, requiring humanity to confront its own arrogance and embrace a new understanding of its place in the galaxy. Dr. Thorne's research took a dramatic turn when he stumbled upon a particularly obscure passage within the dragon lore. That IT spoke of a sleeping god, an artifact of immense power buried deep within the heart of the preserve on Kepler 186F. This artifact, the text warned, was capable of unleashing unimaginable destruction, disrupting the very fabric of space-time. IT was dormant, but its awakening was inevitable, triggered by specific conditions. The key phrase was, "The touch of the burgeoning star children shall stir the slumbering titan." Thorne realized with a chilling certainty that the star children referred to humanity, and their burgeoning colony had inadvertently triggered the artifact's awakening process. He theorized that the dragons had not simply been protecting the preserve. They had been actively containing the sleeping god, preventing its activation for millennia. The bombardment of Kepler 186F, while brutal, was not an act of wanton destruction, but a desperate attempt to destroy the artifact before it could. Fully awakened, they had failed. The colony wasn't just on a preserve, it was on a prison, Thorne explained to Admiral Zhao, his voice tight with urgency. A prison containing something incredibly dangerous, something the dragons were trying to keep contained. Zhao, initially skeptical, was now a believer. The evidence was overwhelming. The dragons' actions, however extreme, suddenly made sense. They had been acting out of necessity, trying to prevent a galactic catastrophe. "So what is this sleeping god?" Zhao asked, his face etched with concern. "What is it capable of?" Thorne hesitated. The texts are vague, but they suggest it's a weapon capable of manipulating space-time, creating wormholes, collapsing stars, even unraveling the universe itself. The realization was terrifying. Humanity, in its ignorance, had stumbled upon something that could destroy everything. And now, thanks to their colony, it was about to awaken. The Stardust, still orbiting the Kepler 186F system, began a detailed scan of the planet's surface, searching for any signs of the artifact. They focused on the region beneath the ruins of New Eden, the city that had borne the brunt of the dragon bombardment. The readings were faint, but unmistakable, deep beneath the surface. Shielded by layers of rock and earth, they detected an energy signature unlike anything they had ever encountered. IT was pulsating, growing stronger with each passing hour. The sleeping god was stirring. The Federation Council, informed of Thorne's findings, was paralyzed with fear. The options were limited. They could attempt to destroy the artifact themselves, risking even greater destruction. They could try to evacuate the remaining colonists, but there was no guarantee they could escape before the artifact activated. Or they could try to negotiate with the dragons, hoping that they would offer a solution. The decision was agonizing, but ultimately, they chose the latter. Admiral Zhao was authorized to attempt contact with the dragons, to plead for their help in containing the sleeping god. IT was a long shot, but it was the only hope humanity had left. The arrogance that had driven them to colonize the preserve had now brought them to the brink of annihilation. Now, they had to rely on the mercy of the dragons, the very beings they had so carelessly provoked. The Federation Council faced an agonizing moral dilemma, one that threatened to tear the fragile unity of the Federation apart. The truth about the sleeping god and the dragon's motives had been revealed, but offered no easy answers. One faction, fueled by lingering anger and a deep-seated sense of injustice, argued for continued military action. They slaughtered our people, Councillor Vargas thundered during a heated debate. They destroyed an entire colony. Are we just supposed to roll over and accept this? We need to show them that humanity will not be bullied. Their argument resonated with a significant portion of the population, who saw appeasement as a sign of weakness, an invitation for further aggression. To them, the dragons were monsters, and the only way to deal with monsters was to fight back. However, another faction, led by Councillor Chun, advocated for a more cautious approach. We know what they are capable of, Chun argued. We saw what happened to Captain Valerius's fleet. We cannot win a war against the dragons. Our only hope is to find a way to negotiate, to convince them that we are not a threat. This faction recognized the futility of military action and believed that humanity's survival depended on its ability to understand and respect the dragon's perspective. They were willing to admit fault, to acknowledge that the colonization of Kepler 186F was a mistake, but they also demanded that the dragons offer a path towards peaceful coexistence. Caught in the middle was the fate of the surviving colonists on Kepler 186F. The activation of the sleeping god posed an immediate threat to their lives. But any attempt to evacuate them could be interpreted by the dragons as a hostile act, potentially triggering a full-scale war. Furthermore, acknowledging the dragons' claim to the preserve and the validity of their actions meant, in a way, sacrificing the colonists. It was admitting that their lives were less important than the preservation of a cosmic balance, a sacrifice that many were unwilling to make. The debate raged for days, paralyzing the Federation government. Admiral Zhao, awaiting orders aboard the Stardust, grew increasingly frustrated. The energy signature of the sleeping god was growing stronger, and time was running out. We need a decision, people, Zhao pleaded during a secure comms transmission with the Council. Every minute we waste debating, the artifact gets closer to activation. Are we going to try to save those colonists, or are we going to let them die? The answer, when it finally came, was a compromise. Zhao was authorized to attempt contact with the dragons, but he was also instructed to prepare for a possible evacuation of the remaining colonists. The decision was ambiguous, reflecting the deep divisions within the Federation. Humanity was caught between two impossible choices, facing a future filled with uncertainty and fear. The choice was appease and potentially sacrifice a colony, or fight and risk annihilation. The future of humanity hung in the balance. Admiral Zhao, staring out at the swirling chaos of the Kepler 186F system, knew that the Council's compromise was a recipe for disaster. Preparing for evacuation while simultaneously attempting negotiation was a logistical nightmare, and it sent a mixed signal to the dragons, potentially provoking them further. He needed a decisive course of action, one that prioritized humanity's long-term survival. He called Thorn and Rostova to the Stardust's briefing room. The Council is dithering, he said, his voice grim. They're hoping for a miracle, but miracles don't happen unless you make them happen. He laid out his plan, a daring and potentially suicidal gambit. We're going into dragon territory, he announced. We're going to try to establish direct contact, to explain our situation and plead for their help. Rostova raised an eyebrow. That's ambitious, Admiral. After what happened to Valerius's fleet, you think they'll even listen to us? It's a risk, Zhao acknowledged, but it's a risk we have to take. We can't just sit here and wait for the sleeping god to activate. We need to be proactive, to show the dragons that we're not the mindless expansionists they seem to think we are. Thorn, despite his initial apprehension, recognized the logic in Zhao's plan. My research suggests that the dragons value knowledge and understanding, he said. If we can convince them that we're genuinely trying to learn from our mistakes, they might be willing to listen. The plan was fraught with danger. They would have to navigate through dragon territory undetected, avoiding their patrols and advanced sensor systems. They would have to find a way to communicate with beings whose language and thought processes were completely alien, and they would have to convince them that humanity was worth saving. Zhao decided to use the Stardust's stealth capabilities to their fullest extent, relying on Thorn's knowledge of dragon lore to guide them through their territory. Rostova, with her exceptional piloting skills, would be crucial in evading detection and navigating treacherous spatial anomalies. Before embarking on their mission, Zhao addressed the crew of the Stardust. "We're not soldiers," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "We're explorers, diplomats, and above all, we're protectors of humanity. We're going into the unknown, facing a challenge unlike anything we've ever encountered. But I believe in us. I believe that we can find a way to bridge the gap between our species, to avert a catastrophe, and to secure a future for humanity." With a silent prayer, the Stardust engaged its stealth systems and slipped into dragon territory. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders, on their ability to navigate the treacherous currents of ancient lore and alien diplomacy. The journey into the heart of the dragon's lair had begun. The only hope now was that the dragons were willing to listen before it was too late. The Stardust's journey through dragon territory was a nerve-wracking ballet of stealth and evasion. Rostova expertly navigated the ship through asteroid fields and spatial anomalies, while Thorn constantly monitored sensor readings, using his knowledge of dragon lore to anticipate their patrol patterns. Finally, they reached their destination, a massive, ring-shaped structure orbiting a binary star system, a known dragon stronghold. As they approached the structure, a holographic projection flickered into existence on the Stardust's bridge that depicted a being of immense power and ancient wisdom, its form shimmering with an ethereal light. This was the Dragon Elder, the leader of its kind. Humans, the Elder's voice resonated within their minds, bypassing the need for translation. "You have trespassed into our domain. Explain your presence." Zhao, his heart pounding in his chest, stepped forward. "We come in peace," he said, his voice steady despite his fear. "We understand that our colony on Kepler 186F has violated your laws. We are here to offer our apologies and to seek your help." He explained the situation, revealing their discovery of the sleeping god and the catastrophic consequences of its activation. He pleaded with the Dragon Elder to believe that humanity was not inherently malicious, that they had acted out of ignorance, not malice. The Dragon Elder listened in silence, its gaze unwavering. Finally, it spoke. "The artifact you call the Sleeping God is far more dangerous than you can possibly imagine. It is not merely a weapon, but a key to unlocking dimensions beyond your comprehension. If activated, it could unravel the fabric of reality, collapsing entire galaxies into chaos." The Elder revealed that the dragons had been containing the artifact for eons, using their technology and knowledge to suppress its power. But the colony's presence had disrupted their containment field, accelerating its awakening process. "We are willing to consider a truce," the Dragon Elder said, its voice softening slightly. "But only if you prove yourselves worthy. You must help us contain the artifact to prevent its activation and avert the impending catastrophe." The Dragon Elder presented them with a daunting challenge. They would have to enter the artifact's chamber, a labyrinth of ancient traps and energy fields, and disable its activation mechanism. It was a task that required skill, courage, and a deep understanding of the artifact's nature. "This is our only hope, Admiral," Thorn said, his eyes filled with determination. "We have to do this, that we have to prove to the dragons that humanity is capable of more than just destruction." Zhao, knowing that the fate of humanity rested on their shoulders, accepted the challenge. The negotiation had been tense and fraught with danger, but it had yielded a glimmer of hope. Now, they had to put their lives on the line to venture into the heart of the sleeping god and prevent the universe from unraveling. The alliance, however fragile, was forged, it was time to act. The dragons provided the Stardust with a small escort vessel, a sleek, bioluminescent craft that seemed to be grown, rather than built. This vessel would guide them to the artifact's chamber on Kepler 186F and provide them with a limited degree of protection from the planet's still active defense systems. Upon arriving at Kepler 186F, Zhao, Thorn, and Rostova, equipped with specialized dragon technology, descended to the planet's surface. The landscape was a desolate wasteland, scarred by the bombardment and choked with toxic fumes. The ruins of New Eden loomed in the distance, a stark reminder of the devastation that had been unleashed. Following the Dragon Guide, they reached the entrance to the artifact's chamber, a massive, obsidian gateway that pulsed with an eerie energy. As they stepped through the gateway, they were plunged into a labyrinth of twisting corridors, shifting gravity fields, and deadly energy traps. The dragons, communicating telepathically, provided them with guidance. But the chamber was designed to test their resolve and ingenuity. Thorn, drawing on his knowledge of dragon lore, deciphered ancient symbols and navigated complex puzzles, while Zhao, with his military experience, disarmed traps and secured their path. However, it was Rostova who proved to be the key to their success. The final challenge involved navigating a treacherous network of energy conduits, a task that required exceptional piloting skills. The conduits were narrow, unstable, and surrounded by deadly energy fields. "This is it, folks," Rostova said, her voice calm and focused. "Time to earn my keep." She climbed into a small, agile dragon craft, a vessel designed for maneuvering through tight spaces. With Zhao and Thorn watching anxiously from a safe distance, she launched into the conduit network. The scene was breathtaking and terrifying. Rostova, flying with unparalleled skill, weaved her way through the conduits, dodging energy bolts and gravity surges. The dragon craft responded to her every command, its bioluminescent hull glowing brighter with each daring maneuver. Finally, she reached the heart of the artifact, a massive crystal pulsating with raw energy. Using a specialized dragon device, she carefully disabled the activation mechanism, severing the connection between the artifact and the planet's core. The energy signature of the sleeping god began to subside. The tremors that had been shaking the planet ceased. The threat of galactic annihilation had been averted. Rostova emerged from the conduit network, her face flushed with adrenaline. "We did it," she said, her voice filled with relief. "We actually did it." Zhao and Thorn rushed to congratulate her, their faces beaming with pride. The impossible had been achieved. Humans and dragons, despite their initial conflict, had joined forces to save the galaxy. The alliance, forged in the fires of destruction, had proven its strength, but the journey was not yet over. The task of rebuilding and reconciliation still lay ahead. The successful containment of the sleeping god marked a turning point in the relationship between humanity and the dragons. However, the victory was bittersweet. The bombardment of Kepler 186F had claimed countless lives, and the struggle to disable the artifact had resulted in significant losses on both sides. Several Dragon Guardians had perished, and the Stardust had sustained heavy damage. The surviving colonists of Kepler 186F were eventually evacuated and resettled on a new world, far removed from Dragon territory. The Federation government, humbled by its near-catastrophic encounter, issued a formal apology to the Dragons, acknowledging their right to protect the preserves and vowing to respect their boundaries in the future. A fragile peace was established, based on mutual respect and understanding. The Dragons, in turn, agreed to share their knowledge and technology with humanity, helping them to develop more sustainable practices and to better understand the delicate balance of the galaxy. That a new era of cautious cooperation began. Human and dragon scientists began to collaborate on research projects, studying the mysteries of the universe and working together to protect the galactic ecosystem. The Federation established a dedicated agency to monitor and enforce the boundaries of the Dragon Preserves, ensuring that humanity never again trespassed into their sacred space. Admiral Zhao, Dr. Thorn, and Lieutenant Rostova were hailed as heroes, their courage and ingenuity celebrated throughout the Federation. But they knew that their actions were merely a first step, a tentative bridge across a vast cultural and technological divide. Standing on the bridge of the repaired stardust, gazing out at the star-dusted expanse of the galaxy, Zhao reflected on the events that had transpired. "We came so close to destroying everything," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and regret. "If it hadn't been for the dragons and for Thorn's research, we would have blundered into oblivion." Thorn nodded, his eyes filled with a newfound sense of responsibility. "We learned a valuable lesson, Admiral," he said. "Ignorance is not bliss, that it's a weapon that can destroy entire civilizations." Rostova, ever the pragmatist, added, "And sometimes the most unlikely allies are the ones who can save you." The story of Kepler 186f served as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the cost of arrogance and the importance of understanding that IT was a story of destruction and redemption, of conflict and cooperation, of a species that had almost destroyed itself but had ultimately found a way to forge a new path, hand in hand with the ancient guardians of the galaxy. The alliance between humans and dragons, born of fear and necessity, blossomed into a beacon of hope, a testament to the potential for unlikely alliances and the enduring power of understanding. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, but also full of dangers, and humanity had learned that it could not face those dangers alone. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The Age of Dragons had truly begun, and humanity was now a part of it.